All right, so all eyes on India as it hosts the G20 summit. It's coming at a very fractured time. You have the Russia-Ukraine war, and that has divided the whole world. You also have what is a fiercely intense great power competition that's going on between the United States and China. Where do countries like India find themselves in the middle of all of this, and how can India navigate these choppy waters to ensure a successful G20, the first that New Delhi is hosting? Joining me now is a very special guest, Professor Jeffery Sachs. Is professor with the Columbia University and one of the leading foreign policy thinkers in the world right now. Thanks very much, Professor Sachs, for joining us. I want to talk to you about the timing of this G20 and what we're seeing around the world. Many are saying multipolarity, multilateralism is pretty much, on its way out. You are effectively seeing the birth of a new Cold War. You have the United States, its European partners on the one side. You have Russia and China intensely and squarely in a box on the other side. And countries are increasingly forced to choose one side or the other. So just paint the picture for us. What a difficult time this is for the global community. More so exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine war. What do countries like India do to navigate through this?
Thank you. You're breaking up a little bit, so we don't have a perfect line, or at least I couldn't hear all of it. But just to say, yes, we have a very high geopolitical tension. I think that it signifies the end of the North Atlantic-led world, the end of the U.S.-led world. We're moving to a multipolar world. The U.S. is moving there kicking and screaming, and this is really what we're seeing. In some ways, the China-U.S. tensions are really a U.S. temper tantrum about the rise of China. Soon the U.S. will be realizing, well, India has also reached the level of peer, and this is just very unsettling for the U.S., which views itself as the world's hegemonic leader. But I think truth is seeping through.
And perhaps because of the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, we're seeing that the West, despite billions of dollars of aid that's been given to Ukraine, Ukraine has still not been able to retrieve all the territory it's lost to Russia. Neither is that conflict seemingly moving decisively in the favor of Ukraine or the West. So would that lesson be tempering on the US and its partners? Or will they get more entrenched? Will they double down now on this war?
It's a very good question. What's been interesting is Russia has shown the sanctions didn't work. The wonder weapons of NATO are not so much wonderful, except that they kill a lot of people, but they did not in any way defeat Russia. So this is eye-opening, and I think the world is seeing this. This is the limit of Western power. It was completely predictable, by the way. But the West is driven by the daily news cycle of these democracies looking for election returns and public support every day. Biden can't afford to back down, he feels. He's running for re-election. He'll look weak. He'll be attacked by the right. So we're in for still a bloody war and more escalation, and it's very, very dangerous. The United States never should have pushed NATO enlargement. This was the reckless U.S. policy that caused this war in the first place. And the U.S. thought we could do whatever we want. Our sanctions will defeat Russia, bring the economy to its knees. The U.S. failed in this, but it really pulled Ukraine into a complete disaster.
You were talking about how domestically it's difficult for a sitting U.S. president to back off or to loosen out a bit, especially when it comes to war. But we have seen examples of U.S. presidents who have domestically, even gone on to lose their jobs, or even, it's been domestically politically detrimental to them, whether it's Nixon with the Vietnam War, whether it was Bush with the Iraq War. Why would a sitting US president who's up for re-election next year double down on a war that looks increasingly difficult to win?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Remember, Nixon was not the end of the Vietnam War. Nixon resigned, and because it was Nixon's war, Gerald Ford ended the war in Vietnam, which was already lost, of course. And Bush Jr. never gave up on the failed war in Iraq. Presidents don't do that. Now, Lyndon Johnson, with a failed war in Vietnam, simply decided not to run again. And by the way, Biden should have decided not to run again, in my view. He's more than 80. He clearly is past his prime, let's say. And the American people don't want him to run again just because of age. But God, there's an addiction to this, it seems. And so he is running again. And it's very hard to see him backing down during this election year, as disastrous as it is for the Ukrainians. By the way, the same is true in Ukraine. This is a complete disaster for the Ukrainian people, but Zelensky is also doubling down because these politicians sometimes put their own interests above the interests of their country.
So if the only conceivable end in sight for this war is that Ukraine and the West accept that it will lose some territory, perhaps up to a fifth of the territory that it used to have before, to Russia to try and find a meaningful end to this conflict, then I'm just curious to know, wouldn't that embolden, let's say, a Xi Jinping, who has publicly said that he wants to reunify Taiwan and will use whatever means it takes, including military means, if it came down to that, for that project?
Oops. I hope we haven't lost the link. Just to say, the real cause of this war was the U.S. push of NATO enlargement over Russia's vociferous and understandable, I would say, objections. But the U.S. kept pushing until Putin reacted in early 2022 and said, "Stop! We're not accepting this armament," and so forth. In Taiwan, unfortunately, the U.S. is also pushing against China's red lines. It's extremely dangerous for Taiwan. The idea that the U.S. can just arm Taiwan to the teeth and then say, yes, we abide by the one China policy is not so understandable in Beijing. It looks very provocative and destabilizing. I wish that the United States could learn diplomacy. It has been a bully for so long and engaged in so many wars of choice and regime change operations that it has forgotten what diplomacy is, which is sit down and work out something with the other side. That's what would protect Taiwan. That's what would end the war in Ukraine.
And I get a final word from you, and we'll go back to where we started about India and its G20 presidency. Obviously, here in India, it's a huge deal. The chances of getting a joint statement because of the Russia-Ukraine war and because all parties involved are further entrenched in their positions today than, let's say, a year ago when the Bali G20 happened and they were able to thrash out a joint communique. What are the chances? What are the realistic chances that New Delhi might be able to get a joint statement after all? And if it doesn't, does that mean that the summit is a failure? What other benchmarks or yardsticks would you use to assess whether or not the Delhi G20 was a success?
Well, first, let's see if some practical steps come out of the summit. I'm hoping, we hear reports, I'm hoping it's true that the African Union will be invited as a permanent member. That would be a huge plus and a huge success for India's diplomacy. So this is what I'm hoping, because the India-Africa relations would be wonderful for decades to come, and I'm hoping that this breakthrough will occur. Maybe we'll hear something constructive on the economic development and climate finance side. If there is going to be a declaration, it all depends on the U.S. Is the U.S. so bullheaded that it says we insist on bashing Russia in this declaration, otherwise we don't have it? Or does the U.S. say we want India to have a success, And so we back off this insistence, because the Indian position, which is the right one, is don't break a summit over these geopolitical issues. This summit is about development. This summit is about finance. This summit is about the world economy. This summit is actually about cooperation. So let's find the places we can cooperate. And so a final declaration depends on the U.S. Does the U.S. want to prove its point? We stood up, or does the U.S. actually want to cooperate with the rest of the world? So we'll see. I'm hoping cooperation prevails and that we have a joint declaration. But I would say India's leadership during the year has already been a success, and I'm very much hoping we'll see some concrete actions like African Union membership in the G20 going forward, because that would be a historic breakthrough.
All right, Professor Jeffery Sachs, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us on this special broadcast.
Great to be